Benjamin Thomas was always the quiet one. It wasn't that he didn't have a voice. It was just that no one ever seemed to listen. A tall, lanky figure who rarely spoke more than a handful of words at a time. He navigated the bustling corridors of Earth's Mars Colonization Institute with an air of indifference, as though the world around him held no interest. To his colleagues, he was simply the brilliant yet reclusive genius whose extraordinary skills in astrophysics and quantum mechanics went largely unnoticed. He never attended the social gatherings, never answered the seemingly endless questions about his personal life. Benjamin had become a shadow in the corner of every conversation, a phantom no one dared to acknowledge too deeply. Yet, within his quiet, calculating mind, Benjamin had been quietly shaping the future of humanity's survival. It wasn't long before something broke. It wasn't a sudden outburst or a grand declaration. No, Benjamin's break came with a quiet whisper, the kind of thought that sneaks past the defenses of a mind already well guarded. His revelation wasn't earth-shattering at first glance, but for Benjamin it was a personal epiphany, a small piece of knowledge that opened doors to a terrifying and infinite potential. The universe, he had discovered, could be bent. For months, Benjamin had been secretly modifying his research under the radar, revisiting theories long dismissed as pure science fiction. He had become obsessed with the idea that the boundaries of space and time were malleable, that a human mind, when calibrated in just the right way, could harness those boundaries and mold them like clay. And it was not just theoretical. Benjamin had done it. He had figured out how to manipulate the very fabric of space-time itself. He didn't fully understand how he had unlocked the key to such raw power, but as he gazed upon the equations scribbled in hastily written notebooks, the answer seemed clear. He had developed a device, a small, unassuming instrument, capable of bending gravity, creating micro-black holes, and collapsing stars in a fraction of a second. It wasn't the kind of thing you casually mentioned at a dinner party. No, this was the kind of discovery that could redefine what it meant to be human. Benjamin was terrified. For years, he had been a quiet observer of the cosmos, learning its patterns, unraveling its mysteries, all the while keeping his findings secret. He had done this for humanity, for Earth, believing in the ideal that knowledge, in the right hands, could propel the species forward into an era of peace and enlightenment. But now, as he looked at the crude device resting on his workbench, he realized he was standing at the precipice of something far more dangerous. This wasn't just a tool for discovery, it was a weapon. The world was not ready. He had kept his work hidden, buried beneath layers of false reports and fabricated results. But the more he thought about the device, the more he realized that silence was no longer an option. The Earth was teetering on the edge of a precipice, caught in the crossfire of intergalactic tensions and a looming alien threat. Humanity's fragile position in the galaxy could not withstand the darkness that was approaching. Benjamin had no choice. He didn't trust anyone, not the military, not the government, and certainly not the alien factions that had begun to turn their attention toward Earth. He had seen what had happened to colonies on other worlds, planets that had vanished in the blink of an eye, their civilizations wiped out by advanced alien forces. If humanity was going to survive, Benjamin knew there could be no half measures. It was time for humanity to have a voice in the stars. He reached for the device. His fingers trembled, not from fear of failure, but from the immense weight of what he was about to do. This was not simply about saving Earth. It was about asserting humanity's place in the cosmos, a declaration that they would not be overlooked. He could hear the voices of his colleagues in his mind, voices of doubt, of fear. They would never understand. But Earth would. As the machine powered up, a humming vibration filled the room, followed by a low, almost imperceptible sound, like the groan of a distant star. The screen in front of Benjamin flickered, and the equations began to shift in real time, converging toward an improbable solution. He hesitated only for a moment. Then, with a quiet breath, Benjamin pressed the button. It was a single moment, a heartbeat of time, that tore everything apart. The room, dimly lit and cluttered with stacks of papers and abandoned coffee cups, shook as though it were caught in the grip of an earthquake. The air itself seemed to ripple, distorting with an invisible force. Benjamin's pulse quickened as he watched the screen flicker again, its data spiraling in patterns too complex for even his genius to fully comprehend. The hum from the device intensified, turning into a low, menacing growl. Then, with a sudden jolt, the space in front of him warped. Benjamin gasped, his breath catching in his throat. The walls of the room bent inward, the air crackling with raw, unbridled energy. His hands instinctively clutched the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening from the pressure. The gravitational pull was becoming unbearable. He could feel it in his chest, in his bones. It was as though the very laws of nature had bent themselves around him, drawing everything into a singularity of his making. For a split second, the noise stopped. And then the stars, they began to fall. Through the small, reinforced window that overlooked the barren landscape of Mars, Benjamin watched wide-eyed, as the night sky above the planet twisted in unimaginable ways. Stars flickered in and out of existence. Some blinked out like dying embers, while others flared to life with a fury that sent waves of light cascading across the planet's surface. An alien hum reverberated through the atmosphere, a harmonic dissonance of energy far beyond human comprehension. Benjamin's heart thundered in his chest. This was no longer just theoretical. This was real. The black holes he had anticipated in his calculations, those small but potentially catastrophic anomalies, were no longer theoretical. They were opening in the sky. One by one, they began to swallow distant stars, collapsing them into nothingness, like an insatiable cosmic hunger. The entire galaxy, so vast and indifferent, was within reach of his hands. He had done it. He had torn the stars apart. Panic surged through his veins, and he snapped his gaze back to the device on his workbench. It was humming violently now, thrumming with a pulsating rhythm, as though it had gained a life of its own. The data on the screen scrambled in a chaotic dance, displaying symbols and codes Benjamin had never seen before. The machine was malfunctioning, spinning out of control. It was doing what he had designed it to do, and more. Much, much more. There was no way to reverse it. Not yet. His mind raced. The planet's entire atmosphere had shifted, and Mars itself, along with Earth, was now caught in the gravitational disturbances caused by the massive cosmic rifts. He had feared the consequences of using such power, but now that it was here, Benjamin realized there was no turning back. Earth was on the edge of destruction, and he was the architect of its fate. Just as quickly as the disturbance had begun, it intensified. The ground trembled beneath him again, stronger this time, as if the very planet were being pulled out of orbit by unseen hands. The room around him felt like it was collapsing inward, the walls warping under the pressure of an unnatural force. Benjamin stumbled backward, reaching desperately for the device, but it was already too late. The damage had been done. He had no choice but to act. With a quick series of keystrokes, he pulled up a failsafe he'd encrypted into the machine's interface, a last-ditch effort to stabilize the destabilizing forces before Mars, and eventually Earth, were completely destroyed. His fingers moved frantically, but the device's screen began flashing red, signaling that the failsafe could no longer be accessed. It was too late. The machine had bypassed its own safety protocols. Benjamin stood frozen, watching as the chaos unfolded before him. Stars were still being consumed by black holes. Massive energy pulses exploded across the surface of Mars, ripping through the landscape. The red sands were bathed in an eerie glow, as if the planet itself was being devoured by a ravenous void. Earth had been thrown into turmoil, and all he could do was watch in helpless horror as his mistake unfolded. But then, something unexpected happened. The machine stilled. The rumbling of the planet ceased. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. And that's when he saw it. A figure, shadowed and dark, appeared at the doorway. Standing there, watching him, was someone Benjamin had never expected. Someone who had been watching him, studying him, for far longer than he had realized. The Quiet One had never been alone. The figure in the doorway stood motionless, like a ghost made flesh. Benjamin's breath caught in his throat as he locked eyes with a stranger, someone he had never seen before, but whose presence seemed so familiar it sent a chill down his spine. The room was silent now, the air heavy with tension, as if the world itself was waiting for an answer. The stranger was tall, dressed in a dark, sleek suit that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the lab, and his eyes were hidden behind a pair of reflective glasses, their surface showing no hint of emotion. His face, though, was cold, unmarked by any sign of the wear and tear of time. Benjamin could only stare, his mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. "Who are you?" Benjamin's voice cracked as he spoke, but his words felt hollow in the face of the overwhelming chaos around them. The figure didn't respond at first, stepping slowly into the room, his movements deliberate. Every step seemed to echo through the silence, each one heavier than the last. As he neared Benjamin, the machine that had caused all of this, the device that had torn apart the stars, began to hum again, this time in a low rhythmic pulse that seemed almost calming. "I am not your enemy," the stranger said, his voice smooth and dispassionate, like the tone of someone who had seen far too much to be shocked by anything. "But you've made a mistake, Benjamin Thomas." The words landed like a weight in Benjamin's chest. He blinked rapidly, trying to understand, trying to grasp what was happening. You knew." Benjamin's voice was hoarse. "You've been watching me?" The stranger nodded, his face still obscured behind those unervingly reflective lenses. "For a very long time, longer than you realize." Benjamin took a step back, his mind swirling with confusion and fear. "But how did you know?" "The device. How could you possibly know?" The figure raised one hand, cutting him off with a calm gesture. "It's not about knowing, Benjamin. It's about understanding what you're capable of. What you've done." Benjamin's heart skipped a beat. He had always believed his research was hidden, his work locked away from prying eyes. But this man, he knew everything. "Who are you?" Benjamin repeated, though this time his voice was quieter, more desperate. "I'm an observer," the stranger answered, his voice chillingly devoid of warmth. "But more than that, I'm part of something much bigger, something that spans galaxies. You've just reached the tipping point of a larger game, Benjamin. One that involves more than just Earth, more than just the stars." Benjamin's mind struggled to catch up. "What game? What are you talking about?" The stranger finally removed his glasses, revealing eyes that glowed faintly, like twin stars in the black void of space. They were unsettling, almost otherworldly. "You've done more than tear the stars apart, Benjamin. You've opened a door that humanity was never supposed to open. You've alerted the others." The weight of those words settled on Benjamin like a physical blow. The others? Yes. The entities, the factions, the civilizations you cannot even begin to understand. They've been watching, observing, waiting. You've just made yourself known. Benjamin felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. "What do you mean, made myself known?" "You've made yourself a target." The stranger's words were clear, sharp, and cold, like the cutting edge of a blade. "By reaching into the very heart of the cosmos, you've drawn the attention of those who view humanity as an insignificant speck in the grand design. They won't take kindly to your meddling. Earth, Mars, all of it, you've put everything in jeopardy." Benjamin felt the ground beneath him tremble again, but this time it wasn't from the instability of the gravitational shifts. It was something else, something approaching, something far more sinister. "I didn't mean to," Benjamin whispered, the weight of guilt and terror pressing against him. "I just wanted to save Earth. I wanted to make sure humanity had a future." The stranger studied him, his expression unreadable. "You've succeeded in one thing. You've drawn their attention. But now, you'll have to deal with the consequences. And whether you like it or not, Benjamin Thomas, you no longer have a choice in this matter." Benjamin stood frozen, his mind reeling. The quiet, isolated life he had led was over. In one impulsive act, he had cast his entire world into chaos. The future of humanity had just been rewritten, and it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much, much bigger than anything he had ever imagined. There was a long pause before the stranger spoke again. "You've opened the door. Now, we have to walk through it. Together." Benjamin swallowed hard, realizing just how far he had fallen into a world he didn't understand. But if he wanted to survive, if humanity was to have any chance at all, he would have to follow this stranger. Whether he liked it or not, the Quiet One was no longer in control of his fate. Benjamin stood at the precipice of something he couldn't comprehend, his mind reeling as the stranger's words echoed in his ears. The room still hummed with the unstable energy of the device, and the ground beneath him seemed to pulse, as if the planet itself were responding to the cosmic disturbances he had unleashed. There was no time to think, no time to question further. The stranger stepped forward, his eyes now fixed on the device, which still flickered erratically with unstable energy. The black holes in the sky had not disappeared. If anything, they seemed to be multiplying, growing, expanding like wounds in the very fabric of space-time. The stars themselves were being devoured, leaving an empty void behind. "Come," the stranger said, his voice as cold and unyielding as the universe itself. "You've torn open a wound in the cosmos, Benjamin. Now, you'll have to help close it." Benjamin's legs felt like lead, his body frozen by a sense of helplessness and dread. He had thought his actions were calculated, his discovery an experiment meant to safeguard humanity's future. Now everything was spiraling beyond his control. There was no turning back. He followed the stranger without speaking, his thoughts swirling like the collapsing stars outside. The figure led him toward the far side of the lab, where a hidden door was embedded in the wall. It had always been there, Benjamin realized, though he had never noticed it before. The door hissed open with a mechanical whine, revealing a narrow corridor that led deeper into the bowels of the Martian base. "You've opened a door to a greater conflict, Benjamin," the stranger said, walking ahead with an unsettling ease. "One that's been going on long, before you even existed. You were never meant to be part of this." "Part of what?" Benjamin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His mind felt scattered, unable to focus on anything but the growing panic clawing at his insides. "The galactic factions," the stranger explained, pausing to look at Benjamin over his shoulder. "The ones who observe, who control the flow of civilizations, the ones who decide what is allowed to thrive and what is meant to be erased. You've drawn the attention of them all, but one faction in particular, one who doesn't take kindly to unauthorized interference, has already made its move." Benjamin's chest tightened. "Who are they?" "A race older than humanity's wildest imagination," the stranger said, his tone grave. "They are the architects." The word sent a shiver down Benjamin's spine. He had heard whispers about ancient alien races in his academic research, beings who had existed far longer than humanity, who could shape galaxies with a flick of a wrist, but he never believed them. They were myths, stories passed down through generations. But the stranger's words brought a terrifying weight to them. The architects weren't just a myth, they were real. And they had just learned of humanity's existence. "We were never meant to be a part of their game," the stranger continued, turning to face Benjamin as they walked deeper into the corridor. "But now you've forced the issue. And that means Earth, Mars, every colony in our system, they are all at risk. The architects will come. They will erase humanity, if they must." Benjamin swallowed hard, trying to absorb the enormity of what was happening. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely audible, filled with desperation. The stranger paused and turned to face him. There was no sympathy in his eyes, only cold determination. "I need you to help me fix what you've broken. You have the knowledge to reverse the damage you've caused, but you will need more than just your mind. You'll need to trust me. You'll need to fight. Fight." Benjamin's heart skipped a beat. "I don't even know who you are. Does it matter?" The stranger's gaze was intense, unwavering. "There are forces far beyond your comprehension at play now. You're going to need to stand with me, or everything you know will cease to exist." Benjamin's mind was swirling with questions, doubts, and fears, but the truth of the situation hit him harder than anything he had ever felt before. There was no escape. The universe was no longer a place he could study from the sidelines. He had become part of a much larger, much darker conflict, one he couldn't control. "Do you understand?" the stranger pressed. Benjamin nodded slowly, though he didn't understand nearly as much as he wanted to. What he did know, what he was sure of, was that the weight of what he had done was unbearable. And if the Earth was to survive, he would have to work with this stranger, whatever he was. It was no longer a matter of choice. The stranger continued down the corridor, leading him to a set of elevators that descended into the lower levels of the base. As they moved, the lights flickered and the hum of the collapsing stars grew louder in Benjamin's ears. The device was still functioning, still pulling at the very fabric of space-time, creating chaos across the solar system. "We have no time," the stranger muttered, punching a series of commands into the elevator's console. "Every moment we waste, more stars die. The architects are watching, but they will not wait forever." Benjamin's mind whirled. He had unleashed the devastation of a dying universe with a single mistake. And now he had to make things right. There was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, he had to face it, even if he didn't fully understand it. The stars, the galaxies, the architects, they were all tied to this moment. All of them were waiting for him to fix what he had broken. The elevator descended, carrying them both deeper into the unknown. The elevator slid to a halt with a soft jolt, and the doors parted to reveal a dimly lit, cavernous underground complex. Benjamin squinted against the darkness, his senses on high alert as the stranger stepped out, leading him through narrow hallways lined with strange, otherworldly symbols etched into the walls, symbols that glowed faintly, as if they were alive. "Where are we?" Benjamin's voice trembled, his heart racing. The pressure of what he had done, the enormity of his mistake, was growing unbearable. He had crossed a threshold he could never uncross. And now he was descending further into the abyss, deeper into the very heart of the disaster he had unleashed. "This is the vault," the stranger replied, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "The heart of the Earth-Mars Alliance. It's a facility that houses what humanity does not understand, ancient technology, knowledge far beyond your understanding. This is where we can stop the architects from interfering." Benjamin's mind was spinning. Stop the architects? How? I don't even know how to begin. "You will," the stranger said simply, his tone unwavering. He turned to face Benjamin, his expression hardening. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but the time for explanations is over. We need to work quickly. The architects don't take kindly to unauthorized manipulation of their universe. They will act soon. If we're lucky, we'll be able to outpace them." As they moved deeper into the vault, Benjamin's mind flashed back to the stars, now beginning to die one by one. He could feel the weight of his actions pressing on him. His device, the one he had believed would save humanity, had become a beacon, an invitation, to powers far beyond anything Earth had ever encountered. And now it was as though his mind was being pulled in two directions. On the one hand, he had to fix the damage he had caused, and on the other, he had to confront the very forces he had awakened. They reached a large chamber at the center of the complex. It was circular, the walls lined with transparent tanks, filled with pulsating energy. The air inside hummed with an electric charge, and in the center of the room stood a massive crystalline structure, a shape that seemed to defy physics itself, as if it were not truly of this world. "The source," the stranger said, pointing to the crystal. "This is what we need. It's a conduit, a device capable of reversing the damage you've caused. It's connected to the very core of reality. The architects have used it before. They know how to manipulate it. We can use it to close the rifts, to stop the collapse you triggered." Benjamin approached the structure hesitantly. His mind screamed in confusion. How was this even possible? Could a single machine like this truly reverse the devastation he had caused? "You've got to be kidding me," Benjamin muttered. "How can we control this? We don't even understand what it is." The stranger didn't answer immediately. He approached the crystal with a reverence that made Benjamin uncomfortable. He placed a hand against it, and the crystal pulsed, sending a ripple of light through the room. "The crystal," the stranger said quietly, "is a remnant of a lost civilization, one that existed long before humanity even dreamed of the stars. The architects themselves found it and used it as a tool to preserve their empire. It's the key to resetting the balance." Benjamin's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. A civilization older than the architects? A lost relic, now humanity's only hope? It sounded absurd, and yet here they were, standing at the edge of oblivion. Suddenly, the room's energy flickered, and the hum of the crystal deepened. The temperature dropped. Something was wrong. The stranger's expression tightened. "They're here." Before Benjamin could ask what he meant, the entire chamber shook. A deafening roar filled the air, and the lights went out. In the darkness, a distant mechanical sound reverberated through the walls, a sound Benjamin recognized only as the unmistakable thrum of enormous, advanced ships entering orbit. They had arrived. "We need to hurry," the stranger said urgently, his calm demeanor now showing signs of stress. "If we don't act fast, they'll breach the vault, and everything will be lost." Benjamin's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what he was doing, no real understanding of how any of this worked, but he knew one thing for certain: he was responsible for all of it. And now, it was up to him to find a way to save humanity, to fix what he had torn apart. The stranger motioned toward the crystal. "You've opened the rift. Now you must close it. The crystal will help you, but you'll need to focus. It won't work if your mind wavers." Benjamin hesitated. "I don't know how." The stranger cut him off. "You do. You've already tapped into its power. You just didn't know it. The device you created, it was only the beginning. You need to connect with the crystal. Let it guide you." His hands shaking, Benjamin approached the crystal and placed his palms against its cool surface. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him, and his vision blurred. The room seemed to distort, and the air around him thickened with a powerful, magnetic force. He could feel something awakening inside him, a dormant potential that now thrummed in time with the crystal's pulse. Images flashed before his eyes, flickers of distant galaxies, dead stars, civilizations crumbling to dust. And then he saw it, the architects, their cold eyes watching him, waiting for him to fail. He knew they would not let this stand. But he couldn't fail. Not now. He focused, willing the crystal to bend to his will, to undo the chaos he had caused. His mind locked onto the patterns, the equations he had once thought impossible, and for a moment, everything clicked into place. The universe around him seemed to stretch and snap, the rifts he had opened beginning to close, one by one. But then, just as the light from the crystal flared to its brightest, a voice, cold and commanding, echoed through the chamber. "You think you can undo what has been set in motion?" Benjamin's heart stopped. The architects had arrived. The voice echoed through the chamber, its resonance shaking Benjamin to his core. It was not just an ordinary voice. It was deep, ancient, reverberating with a force that sent ripples through the very fabric of reality. The sound seemed to crawl beneath his skin, crawling through his nervous system, as though the words were being spoken directly into his mind. "You think you can undo what has been set in motion?" the voice repeated, colder than the void itself. Benjamin's hands trembled against the crystal, his pulse racing. He was standing at the center of something much bigger than himself, a force so vast, so incomprehensible, that it made his very human existence seem insignificant. The architects had arrived. The chamber grew even colder, and the walls seemed to contract, as though the vault itself was being pulled inward by the gravity of their presence. The hum of the crystal faded to a low murmur, like the distant thrum of a dying star. For a moment, Benjamin felt the full weight of his actions. How, in trying to save humanity, he had unleashed a force far beyond his control. "Who are you?" Benjamin forced himself to ask, though his voice quivered. "What do you want?" The response came like a whisper of doom, cold and indifferent. "We are the architects. We shape the fates of galaxies. You, human, have violated the natural order." Benjamin swallowed, the words stinging like acid on his tongue. I didn't mean to. I was just trying. The voice cut through him like a knife. "Your kind always tries. But you fail, as you always have. The stars you seek to save are not yours to command." Benjamin's thoughts spun out of control. The stars, the rifts, the cosmic instability, his calculations had been correct. but they had also opened a door to something far darker. He had never realized that his actions would pull the very fabric of the universe into question. The architects weren't just powerful, they were eternal, and they held dominion over reality itself. He could feel the weight of their presence pressing in on him from all sides. The crystal, still pulsing beneath his hands, felt like a lifeline in a storm, but it was fading. The energy that had once felt so alive was now slipping away, as if the very forces of the cosmos were pulling it from him. "You must stop," the voice continued, its tone shifting, almost mocking. "You cannot undo what has been done." Benjamin clenched his jaw, determined not to show fear. He glanced at the stranger standing beside him. The man's face was grim, his eyes narrowed with cold resolve. "We don't have much time," the stranger said quietly, his voice low but steady. "You've got to push through, Benjamin. Focus on the crystal. They're trying to disrupt it, to keep you from closing the rifts. You've already done the hard part. Don't let them win." For the first time since the chaos began, Benjamin felt a spark of clarity. He had no more time for doubt. The architects had already decided his fate, but he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not after everything he had done to get to this point. He focused, closing his eyes for a moment to block out the cold, seeping presence of the architects. His mind, though overwhelmed, returned to the core of his understanding. Those mathematical patterns, the energy signatures he had analyzed countless times before. The rifts were a part of the equation. They could be closed, but he had to believe it. With newfound resolve, Benjamin pushed his hands against the crystal again, this time with purpose. The pulse beneath his palms grew stronger, surging in a wave of energy that rippled outward. The image of the dying stars appeared before his mind's eye once more. He could see them, one by one, fading away into nothingness. But now he could feel the energy shifting, as if his actions were repairing the rift itself. "Stop him," the voice from the architects commanded, its icy tone growing more frantic. The crystal flickered in response, glowing brighter as Benjamin forced more of his will into it. His hands burned with energy, but he didn't pull away. He wouldn't let go. "Don't let them control you," the stranger urged, stepping closer, his hand resting on Benjamin's shoulder. "This is your moment. They're afraid of you." Benjamin's pulse raced as he felt the crystal responding to his command. The rifts, those terrible wounds in the fabric of space-time, began to retract, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Stars began to reignite in the distance, their light piercing the darkness. Benjamin could feel the architect's presence growing more distant, their attempts to stop him faltering. "You cannot stop us, human," the architect's voice boomed one final time. "You are insignificant." Benjamin's eyes snapped open. "Maybe, but I am still human." And with that, he willed the rifts to close. He focused every ounce of his being on undoing the cosmic wound he had opened. The room exploded in a burst of light. When the light dimmed and the shaking stopped, Benjamin found himself on his knees, gasping for breath. His body was drained, his mind weary. He could feel the presence of the architects still hovering at the edges of his awareness, but their influence was slipping away. The rifts in space had closed. The stars were still there, burning bright. And for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, there was silence. The stranger stood next to him, his expression unreadable, but with a faint hint of approval. "You did it," he said quietly. Benjamin didn't respond right away. He looked up at the once foreboding crystal, now dimming, its pulse fading into nothing. He had done it. Against all odds, he had stopped the collapse. He had turned the tide. And in doing so, he had proved something that the architects had never counted on. That humanity, no matter how small, how insignificant, had the power to fight back, to carve its place in the stars. But he knew this was just the beginning. The architects would not forget this, and neither would the universe. As Benjamin stood and wiped the sweat from his brow, he knew one thing for certain. The quiet one had become something more. And the stars, for the first time in history, had just learned to fear humanity.